Hi, welcome to the Society for the Advancement of Consulting's Supply Chain Special Interest Group. Our session on short-term versus the long-term, navigating turbulent times. Certainly a hot topic in today's world. And I'm excited to be here today with some global supply chain experts to talk about this topic and see what we should be doing. So we have with us today, I'm Lisa Anderson, president of LMA Consulting Group, located in Claremont, California, and also a co-executive director of the Society for Advancement of Consulting. I also have Antonio Zrilic from Croatia, and we are all global supply chain experts, and we'll talk a little bit more about our expertise as we go forward. I also have Patrick Daly from Ireland, and we have Elizabeth Warren from Long Beach, California. So we have both North America and Europe well represented, and we all have some global clients. So we spill over into other continents that we can bring into our discussion today. So to get us kicked off, perhaps we could each bring up, one topic that comes to mind that relates to, should we be thinking about short term versus the long term, or something that you think is a critical piece that we should talk about. So with that said, Patrick, let's start with you. What do you think about the short term versus the long term, and how we can navigate these turbulent times?
Okay, well, I guess there's been a lot of talk recently about population growth and the fact that we hit 8,000 million people, or 8 billion people in the world this year, actually this week. And I know with environmental concerns and climate change and so on, a lot of people tend to kind of fret about that in the short term, because I guess rightly, it's the more people there are on the planet, the more pressure it's putting on our resources, and that plays into supply chains quite a bit, because we're going through an inflationary spike at the moment, which is to do with kind of resource constraints and bottlenecks. But if we stand back and look at population growth and demographics in the longer term, I think there's a more interesting, maybe a more optimistic picture. And that is the fact that although we have the highest population we've ever had, the rate of growth of world population has slowed massively in recent years. And some demographers say, there are different opinions, but some demographers say we might get to 11 billion maybe by the end of the century. Others say we'll never get to 11 billion, that it may actually peak within the next 20, 30 years at maybe 9, maybe less than 10 billion, and begin to decline. So in a way, the population explosion seems to be looking after itself. And this is happening because of rising affluence in Asia and Africa and Latin America in particular. And although some countries' populations will still continue to grow, most of those countries, about 8 countries, will represent half of the growth of global population, mostly in Africa and some in Asia also. But in the developed world, where you are and where we are, and in fact where Antonio is, the population is already declining. And in lots of countries in Eastern Europe, the population is declining. In Japan, population is declining. In China, they have peaked out and are probably going to start. So our challenge in the future might not be so much overpopulation as how do we manage dynamic economies, and how do we think about growth in countries and economies where the population is both aging and declining. So in a way, when we take a view in the long term, we come to some very different conclusions as to maybe what products we should be investing in, where we should be putting our investments, and how supply chain should be configured for that world that's coming quite fast. So within the next 5, 10, 15 years, that will be our reality, particularly in the developed world, declining and aging populations as opposed to population explosion.
All right. Well, we can talk about that topic a bit more. There are some trends going on in the U.S. as well. So, Antonio, what do you think about short-term versus long-term, and what topic you think or that you
Well,
want?
this was a great opening, Patrick, and I also, but I disagree in some things. I don't think. Well, you actually closed it that maybe it is not, and I think also it is not good news that our population actually is getting old, and because that will bring new challenges now for the economy. We now see what's going on in China, and this is pretty much what will all old worlds will confront these challenges, because China had a very rapid growth, but then now challenges this decline. I mean, not already, but in a few years, and actually we could say that 4 or 5% of growth in China is actually decline for them, stability or stagnation for them. So this is a great opening, and because demographic will be a great topic in the future, it is already great. Peter Drucker always used to say that just read the demographic statistics and you will be able to predict the future. So demographic, definitely. I would only add one more thing. As China is declining, but India is in the rise, and also Africa is becoming new Asia. So maybe it's not the same, but some demographs are already talking that probably the economy will shift to I mean investments into Africa. So this is but we could also look at some other long-term topics as energy topic, as big cycles. So some people says that we are now experiencing things that have already we have already had in the past. So maybe we could speak a little bit more about these things during this panel.
Okay, very good. So we have two folks thinking about demographics, but how about you, Elizabeth? What's your take? Could be completely different on what's important from a short-term versus long-term point of view. What are you thinking about today?
Good morning, everyone. And I love hearing from my colleagues around the world, because we seem to think on the same wavelength, and there's so many great topics to think about. So it's kind of like, oh, kid in a candy store, where do I even start? One of the things that came to mind, though, when Antonio mentioned about manufacturing moving west, and I was just at a seminar last week with the Port of Long Beach, and they were talking about manufacturing and China, and it was an event with China, and the Chinese diplomat, the consul general from Los Angeles was there. And China has such a large manufacturing capacity that it's almost staggering how much capacity they have. And as manufacturing moves west, it will take time. It's going to happen. It is happening, but it's going to take some years. Just if we looked at today's manufacturing, it would take 5 more Vietnams. It would take 10 more Thailands, and it would take 37 more Malaysias in order to replace China. So it will move west, but how do we build that much capacity within other Southeast Asian countries in order to really have a dent, really make an impact on China's manufacturing? So that's something to think about long-term and short-term, about that manufacturing capacity. And then also about the environmental, I think Patrick mentioned some of the environmental challenges. And there was a COP27 meeting in Cairo recently, where they're really talking a lot about green shipping. And I know here in the US, by 2030, all of our cargo handling equipment will be zero emissions. And by 2035, all of our trucks will be zero emission. So that will also have impacts locally, but also set trends for around the world. But that's kind of short term, 7 to 10, 12 years from now. But the other issue that is something that we're dealing with here in the US is how do we get the electricity for all of that zero emission? And if you can get the electricity, how do you build the infrastructure in order to transmit the electricity? And whereas it's billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of investment, and where is that investment going to come from? So it's a very, very complicated and very expensive process. We understand the need in order to get these things accelerated, but it's going to be very, very expensive, very challenging.
Oh, that's great. And I think I'll build on that because I work a lot with manufacturers, and I'm definitely seeing that manufacturers are reshoring and nearshoring operations. I think in the US, there's going to be definite progress on the key industries. So healthcare products, industries that relate to national security, defense, those types of computer chips. We're building several computer chip factories. As Elizabeth said, it's not as though you snap your fingers and then you're going to be, you're suddenly reshored. But we are starting to make some significant investments, and the small manufacturers are thinking ahead, and they realize they absolutely have to have more control. There's just no way about it. They have to. China has far too much. There's far too much control over what their manufacturers do. There's zero COVID policies we've been dealing with, and that's on the non-national security type topics. It's just disruptions and supply chain disruptions. And so, recently Warren Buffett invested into the chip factory that's going into Arizona, Taiwan Semiconductor. He happens to also own Apple, and Apple happens to produce everything in China today. So interesting coincidence, possibly. But basically that's where we're going, is we have to find a way to produce a whole lot more in the US. The good news about that is that we do have vast capability, and we can produce to scale. We used to, which is, Elizabeth brought up China's, they definitely have the ability to produce to scale. And we certainly have gotten rid of a lot of our capacity over the years. So there's quite a bit that we need to be thinking about. But nevertheless, there's quite a bit moving back to the US, and even progressive manufacturers are considering moving back. We also are nearshoring to countries close by. We have to be careful that we are nearshoring to friendly countries and ones that have the capabilities. And that means people, skills, electricity, energy, as Elizabeth was saying. So water, It's not as though China has a lot of these things. They're actually turning on all sorts of coal plants to talk about like the opposite of going green. They're turning on every coal plant possible to try to keep up with what's going on there, and their water supply is a disaster. So there's a lot of challenges throughout the world, but nevertheless, that's what I see. But as Elizabeth said, that's going to happen more in the long run, less in the short run. So how are we going to, get from here to there and navigate the disruptions? I think everyone is tired of the excuse of supply chain disruptions. So, go ahead, Patrick.
A lot of supply chain directors now are talking about a China +1 strategy. And I've seen that Apple are now producing in India. So, China plus India. And there's lots of others who've got, whether it's Vietnam or Philippines or Indonesia or Mexico or wherever it is. That's a tactic that is evolving. But in a wider sense, the way I like to kind of think about this in my own mind is to separate what happens in the short term in terms of events and shocks from what are the overarching trends. Because you get a lot of people are feeling kind of buffeted by events and wondering what's coming next, and maybe genuinely having difficulty or using that as an excuse, not really to think thoroughly and long term about where they're going and what their strategy is. But if you separate them out, the shocks and events that we're talking about, say like the pandemic or the war in Ukraine or Brexit, these are things that happen, and their effect is kind of over a period of months, maybe short period of years. But they're happening in the context of big trends, global trends that are unfolding over years to decades. And it doesn't matter what war there is or what headbanger is elected president in whatever country, in whatever part of the world, or whether there's another pandemic, these things don't really change. So demographics is one, that's baked in. What's happening is baked in. But there are 3 or 4 others, and some of the others I like to think about is the climate change. So climate change, even if we go to net zero by 2050, the climate is still going to change. So we have to deal with that. That's already baked in. So that can guide your strategy. The emergence of a multipolar world. So this China +1 strategy is like a manifestation of that big trend, which is the multipolar world. So there's going to be, although the American economy and the European economy are bigger than they've ever been, there are other economies in the world that have grown and make up a bigger proportion of the world economy than they used to. So the Chinas and the Indonesias and the Brazils and the Turkeys and all of these countries around the place. So we're going to have these regional centers of power and influence, political and economic. So the center of gravity of the world economy, which used to sit somewhere in the Atlantic between Europe and America, is now splintered, and it's all over the place in different parts of the world. So that's another one. And then the other big one is the digitalization of economies. That's a trend that's happening. It's going to continue to happen. And I happen to think that those 4 kind of big trends are more deflationary than inflationary. So while we're all pulling our hair out about inflation right now, in 5 years, our challenge might be deflation, because we'll have this declining population, improved productivity from technology, move to renewable energy, which will ultimately be cheaper. And, we'll be in a very, our immediate future, I think, is going to be very different from our recent past.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke at a med tech conference recently, and they were saying something similar to what you're saying, Patrick. They were talking about producing in China for China, they were saying, or Asia for Asia. And what they meant was, like, where the bigger companies can afford to say, you know what, I'm keeping my manufacturing facilities in China, let's say, so that they can support China customers in China. And they're going to produce in America for America, if you will, Europe for Europe. So that's the phrasing that they were using. But I think that really what I'm seeing is even clients that are smaller are still going to have to address this issue, though, because they may not have customers or very many customers where they could do China for China, but they're just going to have to accept that their investments that they've made are sunk costs. Like they're not, they're going to have to figure out where they're going and where they're going to produce and how they should set themselves up to be successful, 10, 20 years from now, not in 2022 or 2023. So anyway, I just bring that up because you reminded me of, I think that's a pretty popular concept, the regionalization. And I tend to agree with you. I mean, I've heard something just recently related to the US. I mean, Japan is a good example of that. They're sort of with population trends, they're topping off. They're sort of more in a deflationary environment overall. With that said, though, there are several complications and shortages that don't appear like they're going to end anytime soon. So it'll be interesting because we do definitely have stagflation in the US currently, with inflation and deflation fighting with one another, which we have had in the past in the 70s. So it'll be interesting to see how this turns out in comparison.
Yeah,
unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the 70s. Sorry, Antonio. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to say recently I wrote an article with the title "Don't Take Advice from the Advisor that are younger than 60." So, well, I'm not 60 yet. So I was kind of against myself, but this is very important when we talk about these big cycles, and now we can see this oil shock that we had in 70s. Now we are having the very similar thing with these gas prices and everything. Then we had inflation also that was actually triggered by this oil shock and lifting off the golden standard in USA, and then we had this recession or depression in 29 to 33, and when you go a little bit back, then you see that similar events happening. And it's important to have this perspective if you want to, so you can be more relaxed if you see, okay, these things actually happen before, and well, we are still here as a world, and the world and our planet will still stand probably after this war, and with after this globalization, regionalization, and demographic explosion and implosion. And so it's important to just to be a little bit more relaxed, because these are heavy topics. But I totally agree with Elizabeth when you said, okay, I always laugh when I hear these plans. Okay, until 30 we are zero carbon. I don't know what. And Mercedes says, okay, we don't produce in 2030. We only produce electric cars. And then they said, not only Mercedes, also other all major automotive companies. And then they say, okay, no, not 2030, maybe 35. But but even if it is achievable, then I always ask them and myself, where is this electric power coming from? We are now experiencing we are now experiencing a lack of the energy, and these prices are very high, and if we change all billions of cars to electric energy, then I don't see this energy coming from renewable sources or any sources if we want. So because it's too short period to make this change, and the world is so big and so complex, and actually it's not possible. So maybe we could do and try to do it, but I think it's just talk, and there is no way we do that. So in that so I think it's a great tool for when we speak about this long-term perspective and thinking. It's a great tool to make scenarios and try to think about different possibilities. And when you think about them, then you see that a lot of things that are just talk in a political arena or in some conferences, and so that this doesn't hold the water when you think a little bit. So I'm always, I don't know how big countries or big statesmen, well, maybe not statesmen, make decisions like that and say, okay, let's shut down our nuclear power and then we'll be green. Yeah.
Well, actually, and I'll let Elizabeth respond to that, but I have to say that I totally agree with you. It's kind of insane. You know, we say these things, and then in the meantime, if you look at the world, it's that we're actually worse off, not better off, because we like our you know, we're just moving the pollution somewhere else or something. That's really all we're doing. And we actually increase the pollution because we're like China's using all sorts of coal mines as an example, whereas we're you know, we actually have the cleanest, some of the cleanest energy in the world in the US. So it's kind of crazy. If we only thought short-term and long-term simultaneously, we would be in a lot better shape. So it's a good topic for today. But you're absolutely right. So Elizabeth, I know that there's a lot of conversation in your realm about this, you know, zero carbon emissions, certainly a good goal, but you know, you do have to have the energy, and you do have to have there's like a lot
The
of
infrastructure. You have to have
the infrastructure. That was where I was going to go. Exactly.
And you have to have the money, and you have to have the money to build the infrastructure. And it's a vicious cycle that I'm not sure how we're going to get out of it, because like Antonio said, it's just not possible. And what happens is you get one little nugget of information, one little glimmer of hope that maybe we could build something. And then you get a whole population of activists who kind of grab onto that and say, oh, if you can build one electric truck, then you can make all trucks electric. And if you can charge one car in your garage, then we can charge all of our cars in our garage. And it's just not possible. And how we're going to, when we get to that point, when elected officials and regulatory agencies realize it's not possible, I don't know what's going to happen at that point. It's going to be interesting, but there's going to come a point when they're going to understand we can't do this. It's impossible. And setting goals is important. We all have to have goals. So that's important to have goals. But to set policy and to penalize companies who don't meet those policies, I think is, and that's something that we've got going on here in the US, especially in Southern California.
Yeah.
And that's a different conversation for another day, but we're setting policies, and then we're going to charge companies who don't meet those goals if they cannot meet those goals. And all that's going to do is just shift that business to other states, which it already is, already moving to other areas, other regions, sometimes other countries. Our neighboring countries of Canada and Mexico have been the beneficiary of some of our policies. But you know, the other thing that I wanted to mention real quick is I'm not a scientist, but I work with a lot of environmental attorneys, and I hear bits and pieces a lot. And one of the things that I heard recently is that in order to electrify everything in California that we would want, it would take so many power plants, so many megawatts that it's impossible to build. You cannot build it. And the other thing that you said about just moving the emissions to another area, we're not gaining anything net globally. Like you said, we're just moving it.
No.
And this is the last little tidbit that I heard. I thought, oh, I have to follow up and get more information on this. But one of my friends who was an environmental attorney said, if the United States, California is very aggressive in its environmental goals, but if the United States stopped doing all of the emissions reductions policies and everything else that we're doing right now, it wouldn't have any effect on the global climate because of everything that other countries, such as China and other places, are doing. That what the United States is doing, led a lot by what California is doing, is really just a blip in the global environment. Really, if we stopped doing everything, it really wouldn't make a big difference in the climate. I'm not, that's what my environmental attorney friends have told me. So like I said, I'm not a scientist, but I want to do a little more research on that and find out, get a little more backing, a little more facts behind that. But it's an interesting concept. Interesting concept that if the US stopped doing everything, would it even have an impact on the global climate?
Maybe not so much because of the reduction in emissions, but maybe more because of the example it would set for others. But I think we might be underwhelmed and disappointed with progress on this front in the short term, over maybe 5 to 10 years. But we might be surprised over a period of 20, 30 years how things change. Because you read some kind of anecdotes about, say, the 1890s in New York, and New York City is growing and growing and growing. And there's so many horses in the place pulling, transport around, that dealing with the manure was a huge problem. So they said, this city is eventually going to grow to a point where they're going to be buried in horse manure. And within a decade and a half, 2 decades, there were virtually no horses in the city anymore because it was all internal combustion engines. So we don't know really what can happen over longer periods of time. And the more pressure there is, whether it's just market pressure or whether it's regulatory pressure or whether it's political pressure, the more pressure there is, the more incentive there is to look for new alternatives. So I get the impression, if we think of climate change, on the one hand, anything that's going to adapt to climate change. So say, we're not successful in reducing emissions or doing anything with the climate, but anything that we can do, the way we build our houses, the way we build our cities, our infrastructure that protects against climate change, I think is an area to look at. And then in terms of renewables to change the energy equation, and in the longer term, do something about the climate, I think there's probably a lot in that space over the coming decades.
Yeah, I think also that you mentioned earlier, it is that this climate change will happen anyway, whether we do something or not. So it's happening. So it is a normal cycle of happening in long run on the planet scale. So we actually have to find a way how to cope with these changes. And okay, all these talks are okay, but we have to go and see what can we do on our small scale. And I think that and it started now here in Europe is well, we are near this war in Ukraine, and we maybe feel a little bit more afraid of future, of an energy future, and so on. So now people are started to thinking how to become energy independent of network of air, and how to be independent of the grid, of the electric grid of big companies that actually and this energy when we speak about gas and electric power is very dependent on the exchange volatility, and it has nothing to do with actual words of this. So now probably in other countries before, but now in Croatia and these parts, companies are starting to invest heavily in, and also they got some help from EU and from the state to invest in energy sustainability in their own plants with solar panels and so on. So I think this is good point to start to think globally and act locally, yeah, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's definitely been quite a bit of, yeah, I think there'll definitely be quite a bit of progress, you know, moving forward. There's a lot of great minds thinking about it. On the other hand,
we hope that they are thinking those great minds.
Well, a lot of them are, but on the other hand, you know, if we, you know, in addition to the electrical grid issue, we have to, you know, like just thinking about like, hey, if everybody got an electric car, you know, where are these batteries being made and how are they being made? And what is that really adding up to be? So, you know, there's like a lot to think about, but I think one way or another, you know, to our topic of short-term, long-term, hopefully we start thinking a little bit more logically about, you know, if we're really concerned about climate change, we have to be concerned about the world. And if, you know, if everyone isn't doing it, you know, it's just going to move around. But we'll see how it goes. But either way, I think certainly there's enough, you know, great minds that we're gonna make some progress. Yeah, you know, we're gonna make some progress definitely long term. So it'll be interesting. But we are gonna go back to some natural resources that are creating conflicts already.
You think I kind of think about Europe and Africa and energy. So Europe is in a vulnerable situation, which is that up until recently, particularly continental Europe, depended a lot on cheap Russian energy. And that option is gone now, and that option is not coming back. And in Europe, although there are shale gas, you know, or maybe not shale gas, but there is potential to do fracking in different parts of Europe. Geologically, there is potential, but politically there isn't, because Europe is very densely populated. So it's not like doing fracking, you know, I don't know where you do it in the US, in some place in Texas or Wyoming or some place where there's nobody about. You can't do fracking in the home counties in England. Geologically you can, but politically you can't. So Europe, I think, is looking very strongly towards renewables. So whether that's wind, solar, whether it's producing green hydrogen, which use the wind to produce electricity, to produce green hydrogen that's burned in fuel cells that drives vehicles. So it's totally renewable. So I think you will see a lot of innovation in Europe and fuel efficiency and energy efficiency, because there's no other option. And I mean, we've already been accustomed to paying, I don't know what the multiple is, but our gas at the petrol pump is probably twice the price it is in the US already, and always has been. So I think that is one. And then people are saying, well, with Africa, as Antonio pointed out, Africa is going to develop, and they're going to want to use energy to develop and grow, and their population is growing. So what happens when they start burning fossil fuels in order to drive that growth? But what we might see happening in Africa is the way they jumped terrestrial telephony. They went from no telephones to mobile telephony, and the terrestrial telephony, they never did it. So they don't have cables for telephony in Africa. They may actually do the same with energy. So they may go from, fairly primitive energy systems, jump the whole fossil fuel thing, or jump it in a greater part, and jump straight to renewables. Now I'm talking in a period of 20, 30 years, that kind of time frame. And this is why I think we might be surprised. Now, we might not be around to see it, but I think we might be surprised the progress we can make in the space of 20, 30 years, as contrasted with the disappointment and the frustration we feel in the space of 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I would like to, well, maybe I think it's now time to maybe bring up some short-term things, because we thoroughly
That is true.
spoke about the long term, and well, our clients have to live another day, another year, and we all actually have to do it. So we know that this all big changes will not go away, and we have to be definitely aware of this, but we also have to be aware of these short-term problems and challenges that we are facing. So I think what we now can see also probably influenced by these long-term challenges that are going on in the background and in the front are the main thing that are now my clients, for example, thinking about a low growth perspective in next year, or maybe more inflation, or maybe these two things connected, going to stagflation, and connected with the big or high prices of energy. It could be very disastrous for the economy. Now we have experience of Japan that is struggling with this stagnation for decades, and maybe we could also face as a Western and or maybe the whole global economy maybe will come or enter this kind of realm. So this is we also mentioned regionalization, and this is not long term. This is actually short term effect that we are living now. So all these things, when you take in consideration low growth, inflation, regionalization, energy prices, and so on. So we are facing now again period that we don't know how long, maybe 1 year, maybe 2, 3, or 5 years, that will again have to go and seek for some innovations, how to get out of this circle that we are facing. And what I see is technology, innovation, automation. We have problems now and challenges with the lack of talents, of people, of workforce, and my clients heavily invest in automation and trying to be also not only energy independent, but also people independent. They are trying to construct processes that are independent of fluctuation of people, and that this knowledge that is accumulated in the companies, this tacit knowledge become explicit knowledge that could be codified in documents, and so because a lot of my clients face this problem, they employ people, and they educate them, train them, and then they left. Actually, the knowledge that they gained actually left with them. Not only when they left the company, but when they go in the afternoon, when they go home, they take their knowledge with them. Sometimes next shift don't know what first shift knew. So this is also a problem that we are facing now, and probably more in the short future.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's a good pivot, Antonio. So Elizabeth, what are you seeing from the short-term point of view that clients can be thinking about where they can take tangible action?
Well, most of my clients are here on the West Coast of the US. And one of the things that we're seeing here, specifically in California, working with our Southern California port infrastructure, is the digitalization. And it's almost a race. Port of Los Angeles, and I've spoken about this before, the Port of Los Angeles has their own system called the Port Optimizer. And now the Port of Long Beach has recently announced that they are working with the developer on their own system. So it's kind of a race to see, who's going to have the system. At least in my mind, it looks like it's a race to see who's going to have the system that's going to be the one. Port of LA has been working on theirs for probably 5 years. Port of Long Beach is getting into the race now. It's something that we've looked at for the last few years, but I think it's definitely what the COVID breakdown in supply chain has done is really elevated here in Southern California, at least, and probably all over as well, is the need to be able to get that visibility into your supply chain to be reactive and make decisions. So I completely agree with Antonio on that. That is something that's happening real time. It's happening now. It's something that I would recommend my clients to, if they aren't doing it, they should be getting as much of that information that they can with their partners, getting involved in these platforms that share information, making sure that they're using something that is encrypting encrypting the data, but definitely get out there and do that. We really thought that here in the US, our midterm elections might have an effect on supply chain, economy, markets, et cetera, and we haven't really seen that happen, overnight. There may be some changes that happen over the next year or two, depending on what happens in future elections. But right now, not seeing a lot of big changes happening due to our elections. However, what I am seeing is something that might happen as soon as December 5th. I literally just got an email within the last 2 minutes that said there could be a rail strike here in the US. A couple of the labor unions did not join with some of the other unions. So now there's a split. And when there's a split, that means that there could be imminent. I did hear yesterday that the Biden administration was very instrumental in the first go round of negotiations, is pretty much staying out of the negotiations now. They're sitting it out now. So, you know, I would say that's probably going to be, I would say chances are there will be a strike on as soon as December 5th. And that's going to have a major impact on supply chains here in the US, especially from the West Coast. So if you've got cargo that's sitting on the ports or coming into the ports in the next couple of weeks, you may have trouble getting that cargo, especially through Chicago, if it's going anywhere to the center part of the state. So, you know, that's a couple of the things that I see going on here. One last comment, you know, our ports here in Southern California have been very, very resilient in handling cargo during the pandemic. But, you know, we've really gotten our warehouses down. We've gotten a handle on our trucking. We've gotten a handle on the congestion in the ports. But that rail strike, I don't know how they're going to be able to get around that, because we don't have enough trucks. There aren't enough trucks to move all of the cargo across the country. So that's something to keep an eye out in the next few weeks. And I don't know how long that strike could last. It could last a few months or even longer.
Let alone truck drivers.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trucks and the drivers. Even if you had autonomous trucks, there's still not enough.
Yeah, very true. All right. Well, so Patrick, what do you think? And then I will.
Yeah, well, I guess, you know, in the short term, you're faced with a threat or an opportunity. You know, you've got to kind of take rapid evasive action, or you've got to jump on an opportunity. But I think it's good that we bring in the long-term perspective, because you can check whether what you're doing aligns with what's happening in the bigger picture. And I think that the productivity thing is one of those. So we have huge kind of input cost pressures, which is leading to inflation. So anything that contributes to improved productivity is going to mitigate that. And if you can mitigate what's happening to all your competitors, so they're all facing the same input challenges, if you can improve your productivity, then you have a choice. You have an advantage. So you can either take advantage of the prices rising and increase your margin because you're more productive, or you can hold your prices competitive and gain market share, depending on what the particular strategic situation you find yourself in. And I'm seeing that with my clients, and on different levels. So you have some who say are in fairly mature markets. They don't necessarily have lots of capital, but they can improve their ways of working, and they can improve their processes. They can improve the way they disseminate knowledge and the way they have uniformity of performance across a team or across an operation. And those types of things you can do without a lot of money. It just takes knowledge and dedication and focus. And I have clients who are doing that. And then I have other clients who are maybe more fortunate. They're in growing markets, or they have capital on hand, or they have access to capital. And some of those are investing quite strongly in automation, because Antonio says they want to become independent of some of the inputs. And in this case, the input of labor, not just because it's becoming more expensive, but because it's becoming difficult to find, particularly for warehouses, factories, driving vehicles, as you said. And when you look at those things in the context of the longer term, they actually do line up with the trends we spoke about, with demographics, with technology, and some of those other trends. So you're ticking both boxes with those, the short term and the long term. That's what I'm seeing.
Very good. Well, and what I'm seeing is that the smart client, I think that clients are going to have to be much more innovative and proactive to thrive in the years to come. So I'm seeing a separation of folks who are, you know, they're just saying, you know what, it's enough. The family-owned businesses, many of them are retiring and selling off. So they're, you know, or going out of business. So I think I see that. And I see with the recessionary trends that are also coming up in addition to inflationary. It's going to be the best are going to have huge opportunities, and some of the rest are going to go by the wayside. So I think there's going to be vast opportunity for those companies that are not just resilient. That's not going to be enough. They're going to have to be predictive and in front of things, but they will have huge opportunities, similar to the Great Depression, which I hope we don't go through another one. But I think the time frame is similar in terms of what's going to happen with companies. During the Great Depression, there was more successful companies that leapfrogged the competition, if you will, and were set up for decades to come. I believe that's going to happen again. And then there'll be, many that go by the wayside. So I think, we'll have an interesting period of time that way. I totally agree with our panelists here that automation is definitely, automation technology, the digitization of the supply chain is all happening at a quick pace, and it's going to be happening at a breakneck pace because we really just don't have the people, and we don't want to, there's so many costs associated with the people. There's so many environmental costs and everything else that we have to find ways to offset it. So I see that there's going to be, a larger and larger focus on, implementing things as simple as implementing upgraded ERP systems so that you can leverage your, systems and technology more to, automating warehouses, manufacturing areas, etc. However, automation does require significant energy, so that should be an interesting phenomenon with what we've been talking about today. So I think, and Elizabeth is absolutely right. I'm hearing the same thing, that a rail strike could easily happen. I think that we are going to have to get, the successful companies are going to figure out how to live within a supply constrained world and come out the other end. It's going to be not for the faint of heart to be successful in not only the short term, but the long term here. But I think that if you're going to be quite, you'll end up, very successful. So it'll be an interesting period of time. And, and last but not least is folks should really be looking at customer product profitability and inventory levels and understanding, how they can best manage through simultaneous inflation and deflation at the same time. So it'll be definitely complex times we live in. So thank you to our excellent panelists today to give us a very interesting perspective about what's coming in the long term, and then how does that relate to the short term. And so stay tuned for our next session, and it'll be next quarter, where we talk about what is most, the hot topic and timely topic to help our clients thrive in not only the months to come, but the years to come. So thank you, and we will see you again next time.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.